that crucial point which brings words and many words and many difficult and different words to children is reading. There is no opposition between silent reading and loud reading in this sense, but reading out loud to children creates the basis for later sustained silent reading. So it's not just the question of to read or not to read. What counts is continued reading to children from a very early age on. And in fact, you can start right on the first day your child is born, because you also begin to speak to this child. And why not reading to the child in a language the child does not yet know, but has already heard speaking in the womb of the mother. And this is already a very important point, because the voice in which language is transmitted to a child is also the voice which the child will later, as a reader, hear while reading silently or aloud to others, because every reading has a kind of voice to it. Even if you listen first, you will connect this listening to words and their meanings, and in the beginning, of course, not just the meanings of the words. And that is also one point that I would like to make right in the beginning that seems to me very important in order to give a certain kind of counter weight to the current desire to measure everything. You have all these kind of test scores. The schools have to teach to the test in order to find out what kind of functions a reader may fulfill according to some pre-designed concept. But if you really think about it, language, before everything else, is always more than just a means of communication or a means of transmitting information. So it cannot just be decoded as something with which I want to tell you something, but it is also an act of social bonding. It is also a kind of music to which ears are adapted and to which persons adapt, because it is an interpersonal system, so to speak. It is not language something that exists as a kind of machine which we employ, but we are part of this kind of organism in which a language operates. And one German writer from the 18th century, perhaps not very much known outside of Germany, Johann Georg Hamann, was famous for claiming that poetry is the mother tongue of humankind. And because he was very keen on studying language as a kind of aesthetic phenomenon, it is clear that he was also opposed, for example, to ridding language, to ridding literature of ancient remnants, so to speak, because language is always historical. And that means if you read texts to children, there will always be more words in these texts than in your normal verbal conversation that you have among people, because that is a clear thing from many studies. Even in educated households, people talking to each other about what will we cook for dinner, and so on. The amount of words is not that much different whether you look at a more educated or less educated in a kind of formal sense. So that crucial point which brings words and many words and many difficult and different words to children is reading, and only reading. It's not brought to them by electronic devices. It's not brought to them by watching TikTok videos or TV series, even scripted TV series. Of course, somebody wrote the text. There's never going to be the same level of oddness of language, of strange words that they don't know what they are meaning, actually. And then, of course, if a child has listened for 3 or 4 or 5 years to parents reading to them every day for at least 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, this child will know or will have heard millions of words that others who have not been read to will not have heard once they begin to go to school, because these words are only there in written language. And the point is that even if you read only children's books, normal children's books, if you very carefully study them, and this is rarely done, unfortunately, are extremely complicated in many ways, and the fact that you are not reading these books once, but twice or 15 times or 100 times is really very important, because also, surprisingly, perhaps these books are often very poetical, and they can be even then poetical and crazy. For example, if you think of the books of Dr. Seuss, which are known to many Americans, they contain lots of nonsense, but due to repetition, to the emphasis on poetic dimensions of language, they teach children that language is also something that is not a kind of authoritarian corset or a frame that is put on you, but is something with which you can also play yourself. And so for reading to children does not have to be restricted to nice stories, but it can also include nonsense poetry, for example. I remember when my boy was very small and I had him on my lap sitting at the computer, I found a website that offered readings of strange poetry. And then at some point, after we had read this again and again, he was claiming that he wanted to listen to one of these particular German poems, which do not really make sense on the basis of, linguistic reference or something like that, but only as a kind of sound. And these particular sounds, I think, need to be taken very seriously, because even if you are not an actor, even if you're not a trained reader, the mere fact that you read to the child is crucial, and that is something I would say has to be deplored, that too many, I'm speaking of course only on the basis of my slim knowledge of the German education system, that this has declined considerably. Simply a teacher coming to class, taking out a nice book and beginning to read it, and to engage the students in listening to the text. And this is, of course, the second point, which I may perhaps be allowed to add before I have to stop. Reading out loud is also a lesson in listening, and listening is a lesson in patience. In German, Geduld. You suffer it somewhat, erdulden, but you learn to be able to listen to others. And this is absolutely crucial for any education in which you want people to listen to some kind of tradition. If you are not willing to listen to anything, you are lacking the crucial virtue of docility, namely of being being willing to learn something. And in this sense, reading out loud also fosters this. And I could say much more about this. Unfortunately, time is up, I guess. So that's it. And we can talk about some of these things later on. But I would like to point out that there is no opposition between silent reading and loud reading in this sense, but reading out loud to children creates the basis for later sustained silent reading, which is also something that schools should be able to integrate into their curriculum without necessarily testing. So simply ending the day with a quarter of an hour of silent, sustained reading calms the students down. They can go home and think about this, maybe even go on reading outside of schools. Thank you.